According to the Sacramento Bee and Cap Radio, it
Mm.
turns out that the somewhat independent uh, commission, I don't know what they're called, investigator,
Investigator.
and somewhat independent investigator, or investigators have concluded that council member Sean Laloe does indeed live in District 2. And it's very surprising that this is the conclusion that they have come to.
What I love about this conclusion is that in order
All
for
of the
this
evidence says
all
it's
of
a
the
lie.
evidence, but
Right.
also like Sean himself was like, that was like when he's talking about being sworn in, in
And he lied
and
about
when
what
he
he was.
lied and said that it was like his friend's like East Sac home, and like he just can't keep any of his stories straight. I don't know. I mean, it seems to me like
He,
what happened
he,
was somebody just like didn't want to actually investigate, so they were like, "Yo, bro, we're gonna be coming around and asking some questions. So if you can just like get yourself in that house on Nogales for a little bit."
Mhm.
uh, I know that it's a hard thing to prove. So, because of course we are allowed to be away from our homes. And so he apparently is registered to vote there. He, receives some mail there. I mean, like, the things that it's kind of hard to say he doesn't, but like he lied about things that make it super questionable. Like the police were
Right.
called to that house 9 times and he was there for none of them. When they asked who
Also,
lived there,
So
the person who
convenient.
lived there said
So
it was
convenient.
them and their son and like their partner and no mention of him.
and the
Like
neighbors have like never seen him
the
around. And
neighbors never
also,
seen him.
like
Never.
during the investigation, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, but I feel like during the investigation or like right after um uh T Clift broke the story in the Sacramento V,
Hmm.
the cops were called out again to his house. Like, so there was record of the cops having been called out because somebody had brandished a firearm, and
Right.
then it happened again. So like, I don't know,
You
maybe
know,
Sean just throws some like fucking kick-ass parties or what.
Yeah.
that's what
I
I'm
mean,
thinking. Maybe.
They're just like,
Huh.
keg stands, here's my
and lives
gun.
with his employees and their kids, but not his own kids who apparently are living in Granite Bay and like going to school in Granite Bay, but he's living away from his wife and kid. Like the whole thing is
Can we
just, come
talk
on,
about
y'all.
the world in which you have an option to like live in a house that like probably has a pool and a hot tub, um in the middle of like triple digit heat in Sacramento, but you also have this other house in North Sacramento that does not have a pool, but it does have 17 cars in the front yard. And
Correct.
you're like, you know what? I'm going to choose the one with no pool.
Yeah.
But
That's not
also,
possible.
the person who doesn't believe in affordable housing, who, I'm sorry, the quote is, I'm not a fan.
He's
Everyone
not
knows
a
I'm not
fan.
a fan of affordable housing.
Obviously, you
Like,
have $1 million
Hmm.
house.
I got questions. I got questions.
Right.
So this whole thing smells of the city attorney wanted to make this go away. And so said, if you can meet the legal standard of, is he registered to vote there? Is he collecting mail there?
Has he ever spent one
Can
night
we,
in
yeah,
that
has he ever
house?
spent one night there? Can we make this whole thing go away? Right. And I think that's what they're ultimately trying to do. And I think it does a real disservice to the people of District 2 because they deserve to have a
Right.
representative who lives and is invested there and not just to make money, but actually as a resident. And I think especially given that it's District 2, like of all the districts to have somebody who doesn't live there and only works there, I think this is a grave disservice to District 2 because it is one of our lowest income districts in the city. It also is one of the ones that has been, and that's not through fault of anyone who lives there. That is by design. It is a place where, businesses have not been placed, especially not quality ones. I mean, Sean is under investigation from, I believe it's the FBI for labor practices. So, so it's like, this is not a place where there are good livable wage jobs. This is not a
Right.
place where we have heavily invested. The Urban League is there, Grant High School is there. Those are wonderful institutions. But if you compare its resources and its investment from the city, county, and state to those of other districts, it pales in comparison. And so that's intentional neglect. And to have someone who comes in who doesn't believe in affordable housing and, is just engaging unethically, I think is a real harm that's being layered on top of historical and ongoing harm to this community.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
there's like a lot more questions to be asked here. And I get that, like, at this point, the city is not going to invest any more resources in those questions. But, like, I'm interested in who this independent investigator is and, like, what her connections are to Sacramento. Like, because her office is in Sacramento, right? So she is
My
it not?
understanding is they work for the city. That's why I said semi-independent, because
Yeah, it's not
my
independent.
understanding is
Yeah.
that this is not really an independent investigator that's completely
Yeah.
unfamiliar with this.
And why
Um,
would it be?
yeah.
It's
Right.
a reliable vote for the establishment of the council going forward. I mean,
Yeah.
even if like he was indebted and dependent upon his colleagues to keep his seat, because they could at any time just decide, you know what, we're going to vacate your seat because we don't believe you. But they also, like, now that with the investigation cleared, somebody's got is owed something big, and
Right.
that's a reliable vote going forward, which only
Yeah.
diminishes the credibility of the council going further.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we have like so much more to talk about, like another super cool council member. We're going to talk about that guy right after this super cool song. So let's start the show.
Voices, the things they said, voices, some from those dead, all the voices heard. Voices, things we say, voices, they're in your head, all the voices heard.
Well, hello, everybody. Did I sound like Kempa?
You sound a little bit like Empa.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm Shannon.
And I'm Flo.
And I'm Keyan.
Yay!
Wow, look at us. So no Skylar, no Kempa this evening.
We miss you, bros.
Yeah, we miss you, bros. Kempa's like knocking on doors, making sure, really trying to get people not to vote. Trying to get people to vote no on Measure O.
NoOneO.net.
And Skylar. Well, we're talking about city things, so Skylar's not here. He's doing Skylar things. But oh gosh, I'm just back to the show, and now I have to do like the formal thing, which is at the front of the show we talk about how you, our beloved listener, can support our work if you love it by giving $5 a month to Patreon. That's patreon.com/voicesrivercity. You know what? $5. It's like a pumpkin spice latte that you're not going to have one time this week, or it's like a beer at the bar. I don't know. Kempa has a whole way that he does this, and I'm just like not as good at it. So if you like what the fuck you're listening
Give
to,
us money, please.
just help us do what we do by becoming a patron. And when you're a patron, you get things like if you pledge $25 a month, you get a shirt and a coffee mug, which is super dope. But also there's like Patreon hangs, and most recently our patrons received a recording of Flo's 5-minute stand-up comedy set, which was sick. So
Wicked sick.
more things to come if you're a patron. And if that's something that you can't do, like, please, that is totes okay. We love you too. Also follow us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram because we're on all of those things. And our name is really easy to remember because it's Voices River City on all of them. I don't know. I think I got it all. So now let's talk about the thing that we all really wanted to talk about last week, but we didn't because we knew that people had received their ballots in the mail, and we were like, we don't want people to just start, bubbling in things without listening to our voter guide episode. So we did that. But today we're here to talk about the one, the only council member Jeffrey Harris, who has been in the news for being super cool and just like culturally competent and just like hella woke. So
that happened.
So there's that. And we have Keyan here tonight, who is it's nighttime right now, so pardon me. Keyan is the vice chair and District 4 commissioner of the on the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission. He is also a community organizer and an abolitionist, and oh my gosh, there's so many things. But we're super excited to have him on tonight because for those who don't know, Jeffrey Harris, the council member with the garden background on his Zoom screen, called for Keyan's removal from the commission because he was personally offended by, truth. So anyway, let's get into it. And I've been talking a lot. So Flo, will you set us up for this?
Yeah, sure. Let's get into it. So Keyan, you serve on the Police Review Commission. Can you tell us just a little bit about like what is the Police Review Commission? What do you do? Why do you exist?
That's a good question. And
like, I don't know.
They're all good questions. I asked myself when I joined this commission. But on paper, the purpose of the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission is to provide civilian oversight. We were established to provide community participation in reviewing and making recommendations for the Sacramento Police Department's policies, procedures, and best practices. And that includes things like community relations, hiring practices and policies, as well as training best practices. We're also tasked with monitoring the implementation, evaluation, and sustainability of city policing initiatives and programs. So we're basically an advisory body, and we make recommendations to the city council, usually supposed to be on an annual basis, to make sure that SacPD is doing its best effort to provide bias-free policing and community and fostering good community police relations.
You said supposed to be. Can you tell us a little bit about like what's actually happened? Because that's always what happens in policy, right? Like you pass a policy, maybe with good intentions, maybe knowing full well you're going to undermine this thing at every turn. But then there's a difference between what's passed and how it actually plays out in reality. So what has the experience of the commission been?
Yeah, the experience of the commission has been sadly less than stellar. Frankly, it's been out of 115 recommendations that we have given since 2018. We have only passed a whopping total of one whole recommendation, which, if for folks who pay attention, was the updated use of force policy that was passed last year with no small effort given by the freshman council members, Katie Valenzuela and Mai Vang. And honestly, that was as nice of a token as that was for our work. And I mean, honestly, the work of the commission, that's like many of whom have been on this far longer than I'm into my first term. But we've still been waiting for the remainder of our recommendations to even be brought up. And the last time we had really talked about our recommendations was back in September, our military equipment use policy recommendations, which we submitted 5 simple recommendations to the council, which around how to make sure that Sac PD was complying with the new state law AB 41, which provides more oversight and requirements on how it can use military equipment and weapons in civilian populations. And unfortunately, those were just blatantly ignored during that time. So here we are in October 2022, still waiting.
That's like recommendations from the commission being blatantly ignored is a good segue into, I think, talking about like over, you know, in the history of like my time in Sacramento, which is, I don't know, it's irrelevant. This city has, for a very long time, struggled with racial equity. It struggled with holding space for the voices and experiences of those who actually feel those like negative impacts from, for example, the police, right? And I think one of, like, it is very telling, and I'm glad, Keyan, that you use like data to talk about the work that you're doing on the commission, because when you say you of over 100 recommendations, only one has been passed, it's like you have all of these folks who are offering their input because this review commission was started as a direct result of the necessity for work toward racial equity in this community, in this city. And yet all of that input is just being ignored and effectively like invalidated, as this work is not, you know, being, these recommendations aren't there, there's not even an audience for them that actually gives a shit. And I think that like that I think does bring us to this space that we find ourselves in currently, which is just like continuing to, especially, I mean, like people of color in Sacramento are just like so like undervalued and so pushed into the margins, and voices are not amplified, and we elect people into positions of power in order to, you know, hold space for those experiences and those voices, and then we end up with people like Jeff Harris, who on September 20th called for your, Keyan, for your removal from the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission. Gosh, there's so many words.
So many words.
It's so
I have to
many.
sum it up with SCPRC or PRC for short.
Well, even that, it's so many letters.
Yeah, that's rough. It's
Right?
all rough.
True story.
So Jeff calls for your removal, and I think we can't talk about that without also talking about all of the bullshit that predates that call, right? Which is Jeff has long sort of like demanded from people in the community a certain way of taking up space, which is very like proper and like wear your bow tie and use very big words and like just like really sort of elevating this white supremacy culture.
Yes.
And most recently, I think in one of his like very egregious moves as the council member, Katie Valenzuela, an Indigenous woman, the only Indigenous person on the council, did a lot of work to bring forth just acknowledging Indigenous people in our community. The council adopted the practice of reading the land acknowledgement before every public meeting, and Jeff Harris has outright refused to read it.
Yes.
He has been
Every time he's asked, he says,
says,
I'll do the Pledge of Allegiance.
And the Pledge of Allegiance, which is
which is, you know, like, and I know some people are gonna have a problem with this, and I kind of don't care, because as I was watching this documentary about, you know, just the atrocities and the ahistorical nature of how we're taught about Columbus and how Columbus is revered in this country, despite never actually making it to mainland US, and despite being like a rapist and a, you know, an abuser and a torturer and
all around horrible,
right?
Just a genocidal
just a terrible, just a terrible person by all standards. But the Pledge of Allegiance was actually developed in honor of the 400th anniversary of the celebration of his voyage to commit all kinds of genocidal and colonial atrocities. And so just, you know, adds another, and I recognize that the history of a country that is so deeply rooted in white supremacy is going to be difficult to, you know, disentangle from it. And a lot of things are going to have literal and metaphorical blood on them. But that one just really stings as like, in addition to you not being willing to do the land acknowledgement, the thing you are willing to do is just another slap in the face of the Taino people who were, you know, who suffered at his hands, you know?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what a lot of people don't, I'm learning recently is like, a lot of people I don't think know even that like during Christopher Columbus at the time was returned to Spain in chains for what he did over there. But either way, I mean, like you're absolutely right. The Pledge of Allegiance is very new within the span of our 230 plus year history as a nation. And it's like recognizing, like simply acknowledging that this land that we live on is like our ancestors stole and conquered for profit and land property is such a basic ask. It's a low bar to like lift, and
it's like straight up facts.
Yeah,
right. Like all it is saying that the history books are accurate, and I get, and I know that there are history books that exist that aren't going to actually say that, but like you have to read a piece of paper that is provided to you to say like a thing that you actually voted to support, right? Like now during that meeting he was like super shitty about it, and he did ask why the land acknowledgement was necessary, and he didn't ask that question of his colleagues. He asked that question of the Indigenous people who came to the meeting to present, you know, to the council. It's like, he's like, I'm not, listen, I'm a white man and I'm not going to do the work. You
justify yourself to me.
Right. Tell me why. Tell me why I should acknowledge that your people started here on this land.
It's giving, you know, colonial vibes for a number of reasons, right? Number one, in my culture, you don't walk up in somebody's house and not speak, period.
Right.
Right? Like the first thing you do when you show up in someone's home is you greet the host.
Mm-hmm.
When you walk into a room of people, you greet the people who were there before you. That is like literally a cultural value. So the idea that you were here on stolen land that you weren't even invited into, and you have the audacity and downright gall to then turn around and say, why do I need to acknowledge you in the first place, is a problem for me. But I also just think about how, like, so much of the United States is rooted in this idea of property and property over people, right? And so even in the way that we pledge allegiance, we pledge to a flag first, to a piece of property. And then we're pledging allegiance to a republic. But why are we not pledging allegiance to the people? Like, it just, something about our values is even spoken in the order in which we describe things. And so I just offer for you the People's Pledge, which has the same cadence, but I think for many of our listeners speaks to our values. And it's, I pledge allegiance to the people who inhabit the earth around me, to protect human rights and our global environment in principle and practice, restoration and service, attaining liberty and justice for all. And it's a good way if you want to, be respectful of the time that is set out during a meeting for the Pledge of Allegiance to recite something that has a similar cadence. But I think for many of us speaks more to our values, because my values certainly always value people over property.
Well, what we learned recently is that Jeff Harris's values are to call for the formal silencing and removal of voices and people whose critiques do not line up with his own.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so let's get into what happened.
Yeah,
like, because there's a lot of stuff that happened. So he doesn't do the land acknowledgement, right? And then Indigenous Peoples Day is coming up. And what does our friend Jeff decide he is going to do in the lead up to Indigenous Peoples Day this year?
I'm going to accuse the only Indigenous council member of trying to approve this resolution for personal financial gain. That there is a financial motive, basically the racist stereotype of Indian giving, that you're doing something in order to get something in return. And
Which,
incredible.
if that's not psychological projection, I don't know what is, because literally the main people who only gave something to get something in return, and I'm using gave in air quotes because they didn't give shit, were the colonizers. Like, it's outrageous.
Right. Yeah, let's look at all the developers that have been giving money to the city council incumbents for so many years. Let's look at the police department union, who's been giving up to $115,000 to a majority of sitting city council members since 2016 alone. Like, we want to talk about who's getting money to get something in return. I would say those developers that are really enjoying the ever-increasing rent rates that are going up in Sacramento, and the police department that continues to escape any form of meaningful accountability, have been the best recipients and been getting their money's worth in their giving.
So this kind of reaches the tipping point, right, on October 11th.
Yes.
October 11th.
Well, it starts on the 20th of September.
It starts on the 20th because
technically it starts on the 13th, because that was the time when it actually got started.
Yes, that's right. So Keyan, why don't you tell us what did you say on the 13th that started this whole kerfuffle?
Right. Because it all began from the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission, the SCPRC, spending months of its time. We work on a volunteer basis with very little staff support. OPSA staffs, the Office of Public Safety and Accountability staffs us, but only for the meetings that much. So we've been putting in a bunch of work, trying to put forward honest recommendations that honestly are quite modest. And we were simply looking to make sure that the Sacramento Police Department was in compliance with AB 481, which its current policy has approved. I don't believe that it is.
What's AB? What's
AB
AB
4 AB 481 is the state's new law that requires law enforcement agencies to publish its military equipment use policy, as well as create written policy governing its use and requiring local governing bodies, that's city councils, that's boards of supervisors, to now approve any and all purchases and acquisitions of future military weapons and equipment not already in its inventory. So it's basically like it's in response to the police response to the George Floyd uprisings, and their just indiscriminate use of rubber bullets, tear gas, and other military equipment, to peaceful protesters, simply demanding accountability for police brutality, like for the police departments.
Yeah.
So. SAC PD has put forward its military equipment policy, and after careful review, we came up with 5 honest recommendations, which were to require the police department to conduct comparative and demographic reporting for its annual reports. That way we can have information about where the military equipment is being used, who it's being used against, and what context the equipment is being used. And then to clearly state specific situations where SAC PD is both authorized and unauthorized from using military equipment, so people know the situations when it can't be used. And then also designating independent oversight authority, which is a clear requirement in AB 481, and we recommended the Office of Public Safety Accountability, or OPSA, the Inspector Generals, and the SCPRC be designated those independent oversight authorities to ensure the department's compliance. We also recommended requiring the police department to seek city council approval for any and all purchases or acquisitions of military equipment. That includes with public or private funding, and to establish clear limits on the military equipment stockpile, so that all military equipment acquisitions has to be approved separately from any updates to this military equipment use policy and the annual reports, which require them to list the cost and any requests for acquisitions and such. We thought that these were modest recommendations, and the community were community members that we had been engaging with were outright saying they don't even want this policy. But lo and behold, when we brought it forward to City Council on September 13th, after a lengthy presentation and public comment period with overwhelming opposition to the policy as written, Mayor Steinberg and 6 council members, Angela Gashby, Sean Maloney, Jeff Harris, Jay Chenier, Eric Guerra, and Rick Jennings, all ignored all community concerns and disregarded the work of its own civilian advisory body for police oversight and approved the policy as written. The only change that they made was basically that Sacramento Police Department cannot replenish 10% of its stockpile without city council approval. If they didn't improve that, they basically would have been flagrantly out of compliance with the law. So with that in mind, to add insult to injury, city council allowed the police department to essentially just lie about their community conversation, misrepresent its own conversations with our commission concerning the military equipment use policy, and then openly joke about it within earshot of community members, as several community members had raised during the meeting and told me as well. Council members Valenzuela and Bang were the only ones that raised critical questions or pushed back on the misrepresentations. The rest of the city council just gave non-binding verbal directions to the police department to work with us, the commission, on our remaining 110 recommendations, or 115 recommendations now, without any binding commitments for changing its policy. So after the vote and during off-agenda comments, I responded as a concerned citizen of District 4 to the mayor and council for their flagrant conflict of interest in accepting over $115,000 in donations from the Sacramento Police Officers Association. That's since 2016. And I also expressly called out Jeff Harris after he spun a flagrantly false narrative that I found to be profoundly racist, not to mention dismissive of Black experience with police violence. And essentially called him, my exact words, Jeff Harris, you're as racist as Jim Crow. Nothing to say. Needless to say, Jeff didn't really appreciate that coming from the mouth of a Black commissioner expressing his frustration at City Council's actions. So during that September 20th meeting, lo and behold, during council comments, Councilmember Harris directed the city staff bring up an item to discuss my removal.
And so that item was put on the agenda for October 11th.
Right.
And so let's talk about then what his argument was, right? His argument was that this was conduct unbecoming of a commissioner and that it doesn't currently violate our rules of procedure. So not only should we remove Keyan, but we should also change those rules and make them, I guess, retroactively enforced so that we can justify why we would remove him.
Yeah,
right.
the big, like, he was, this was obviously a reactionary response to being personally offended, right? And this is what happens it's like someone gets called a racist and they're like, but what? Not me. And then they get like super fucking defensive. And this is a person who is in a position of power. And so he abused his position of power once he was personally offended to then call for a commissioner, Keyan, for Keyan's removal. And he cites like you said, the argument was like, you have to behave in a certain way. There's a certain standard of behavior. And as you said, this is like unbecoming of a commissioner. To tell the fucking truth is really what it is, right? Like, you're not. And then he started talking about like use of language where like, but you were, when you made that comment, Keyan, you were calling as a resident of District 4, a concerned citizen who lives in District 4, like your work as a commissioner had been paused at that. And fuck that.
Yeah.
Because even if you were calling in your position as a vice chair of the Sacramento Police Review Commission, like you're doing your fucking job, which you're not getting paid for, to call people out. Like that's
really what it comes down to, right? It's like, this is like, I got into this position, like I approached the commission very skeptically of whether it was the opportunity to serve on this commission was even worth my time, knowing full well the history and what community members had demanded initially, which was a civilian oversight body that actually had teeth, that could make binding decisions and require SACPD to both produce information for public review and then also to actually implement the recommendations that the commission gave. Community members got none of that. So, but I chose to give this appointment a chance in the hopes that we might have serious, meaningful conversations about a long history of racial bias and racist outcomes in Sacramento Police Department practices, which have been confirmed by 3 separate studies just over the last 20 years. Like what a lot of people don't know about the commission is that our work is like been 20 years in the making. Basically, we are we are the latest iteration of what was formerly known as the Community Racial Profiling Commission that was founded back in 2004 after a 2001 study was published finding that Sacramento police traffic stops were disproportionately targeting Black people at twice the rate of other motorists. So we, in doing that work and doing a follow-up study in that was published in 2008, it confirmed the exact same thing 7 years later after the first report. And so the commission, kept doing its work for a number of years, mostly under the radar, and then eventually, due to community demand, was reformulated by the city council at the time under Mayor Kevin Johnson to become the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission. And since then, since then, there's been another study that was published most recently in 2021. For example, the Center for Policing Equity reported that was requested by Sacramento Police found that between 2014 and 2019, Sac PD overstopped Black motorists at nearly 3 times as often the rate as white motorists, which is the third such study in 20 years to confirm racist outcomes in Sac PD practices. Not only that, but Black Sacramentans have been subject to non-traffic stops over 6 times as often as white pedestrians, we comprised 47% of all people stopped in 2019 alone, despite being just, I believe it's less than, we were less than 13% of the population at the time. And even worse than that, Sacramento police have used force against Black people in Sacramento 4.5 times as often as white residents, which was twice the national rate at the time of the study conducted. So when we talk about why are we so upset, why would I be upset and want to call this stuff out? It's simply put, the data unequivocally shows Sacramento Police Department culture is stunningly racist and produces racist outcomes in every policy and procedure it has right now.
So let's take a step back, Keyan, because what you just provided is really compelling data, right? And I think sometimes we get lost in the numbers. So what we're essentially saying is that the lived experience of people going about their day and lives in Sacramento is such that if you are Black, you are more likely to have these negative encounters with the police. That then the city, because there have been these reports and because there have been these uprisings, has then created a body that it is tasked with trying to address this, that has been fought every step of the way, not been taken seriously, not been agendized by the council. And then when that frustration is shared with said council, the response of an individual member is to try to use his institutional power because of his personal offense to remove one of the people who is trying to be a part of this solution and trying to address these very racist practices. Because what I'm hearing is this sort of confluence of factors that layer racism on top of racism on top of racism. And this is what we mean when we say structural racism. So Keyan, if you're offended by something that Jeff Harris does, you really have no recourse other than maybe going to the ethics commission and saying, hey, did this person do something that's illegal, immoral, or violates, some standards? But as a council member, he has the ability to make a comment on items on the agenda that then becomes agendized for public comment and discussion to be able to make an institutional decision. And see, that is how your individual biases can then become policy and law. And that's how it gets baked into the process. And so this is how white supremacy works. But then let's talk about what actually happened during this meeting, because he made this comment on the 20th. It gets agendized on the 11th of October.
Right.
And now everybody has to spend, as I said in my public comment, precious life minutes that Black and brown people are unfortunately have too few of.
We don't get that many anyway.
To fight this, right? To fight this institutionalization of someone's hurt feelings, of white tears, literally, only to have the council ultimately decide that they don't want to proceed with removing Keyan.
Sorry.
And also for then the member himself to rescind because he hadn't even bothered to talk to his own police commissioner. And he was doing this under the guise of, I think this was conduct unbecoming of the police commission and it undermines their legitimacy. And nobody on the police commission felt that way.
They were like, nah. But so before we get, because that is ultimately what ends up happening. On the morning of the 11th, there is, for immediate release or whatever, all of a sudden this, I actually got the alert on Twitter that Councilmember Katie Valenzuela, District 4, had called a press conference because she was calling for the censure of Jeff Harris, because she had, the basis was, that there was like a series of racially insensitive incidents, comments, all of these things were, involving him. Some of them are the things that we've already discussed. And this happened to be on the day after Indigenous Peoples Day, the day that the council was going to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day on the agenda. And also there was going to be public comment around, or there was going to be a vote on whether or not Keyan should be removed as a commissioner from the Sacramento Police Review Commission. So I guess the
and unfortunately, he wasn't there in person. So the picture for Indigenous Peoples Day,
it's so fresh.
Everybody there, and then him
it's
on
so
Zoom
good.
in the background scowling down over them.
Yeah,
it's very on brand.
It's incredible. But I think one of the things that when that press release came out, and sort of keeping my finger on the pulse of sort of how that day was rolling out, one of the things that I kept thinking was, we have this council where there are obvious issues of racism. There are white supremacy is so real on that council. It's so real in the way that Daryl calls for decorum.
In culture, policy, and practice, yes.
All of these, yes. And the way that the council votes on measures, ordinances, all of these that have impacts on people of color. And as you say, on culture, all of these, white supremacy is alive and well on that dais. And nobody is addressing that, except for, of course, an Indigenous woman who, it's the people who are most impacted are also having to do all of the emotional labor and all of the work in order to bring these things forward. So,
and Councilmember Vang was the one who championed the Racial Equity Alliance and the Racial Equity Council. It's always the people of color trying to champion these things. And at the same time we're doing this, we're undermining this with this kind of nonsense.
So Councilmember Valenzuela calls for censure. What does that look like? Do we think that was a good idea? Where are we at with the censure piece? Censure of
Councilmember Jeff Harris. What do you think, Keyan?
Now that it is on official record, the request has already been made, and now it's up to council basically to take whether it takes action on it. Given that Jeff Harris is leaving the council by December or so he's got barely a month left. I highly doubt this council is going to bother moving forward with that. But the precedent is at least set, and as small a step as that might be, it's really important that we're pushing back on that, and really important to remember that at no point is it people of color's job to inform white people of of the system of white supremacy or its culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's so and this is the thing. I mean, in my experience, lots of times I'll get phone calls or text messages or emails from friends who are white asking for takes on certain things, right? And it's y'all, do your work. Do your homework. I am not the person that like your token Mexican with the Mexican takes, or like your token Indigenous person with the Indigenous takes. Like I'm not the one. Like it is not the job. Like it is a fucking shame that Councilmember Valenzuela had to do this like on her own, which I mean, in the end, I guess like it wasn't necessarily on her own, because she did find like there was, well, I mean, the censure is one thing, but she did find support in other members of the council by, you know, saying we should not remove Keyan from the commission.
Yeah.
But it's just like, you know, she was quoted after, I think it was KCRA like interviewed Councilmember Valenzuela after the council meeting on the 11th, and they asked sort of like where she was at with all of it, and she was just like, I'm exhausted. Like it's hard to have these conversations, and absolutely, like the amount of work that she is doing, not only to like, you know, protect herself and to, you know, to activate the self-care that she needs in order to show up every day in a space that does not value or affirm her presence.
Right.
And in addition to that, she's also, you know, standing up and amplifying the voices of other, you know, folks, people of color, that like, and then she's the one who calls for this censure, and she's being attacked constantly on social media, and I'm sure she's receiving emails
in very
left and right.
racist ways.
Racist.
I mean,
so
when
racist.
this whole thing was coming out, the guy John, I think his name
Frias
is
Morales.
John Morales
he hops on Twitter and does the very. I was like, oh, are we doing one drop and blood quantum stuff? Because he gets on and he's like, she doesn't even have a registration number. How can she say she's Indigenous? And I'm like, I'm sorry, who are you to be the arbiter of, like, first of all, read a book. Second of all, buy a clue. And third of all, please shut up, because you sound ridiculous and you're espousing nonsense. And you know, just to have to even, you know, deal with that when all she's asking for in a censure, he does. I mean, first of all, Councilmember Harris is going to be leaving the council in December anyway. But all a censure is essentially like a formal statement that just says we disapprove of what you did, right? And adopted by a majority vote. It does not actually come with any legal consequences other than just, again, it's part of the culture and practice of this is not tolerable behavior of a council member. And I think that's certainly warranted here.
Absolutely.
But I also want to get into, because I know we're getting close on time. There was something, you know, growing up, my parents would always say to me, it's not just what you say, but also how you say it. And I walked away from the city council meeting that night feeling icky about the win. And I'll tell you why. Yes. Because even with, you know, Keyan not being removed from the police review commission, which was absolutely and unequivocally the right call, there was something about the rationale that was employed by many of the council members that bothered me, right? It was the like, the procedure for this. I mean, the conversation devolved into whether or not these things should be put on the council log and whether we should have a council log. Right. And I'm like, that's a good way to be able to skirt the issue at hand. Right. I think the other piece that really bothered me was the fact that the police review commissioner from council member Harris's district was an older white man who, by his own admission, said he's never had any problems with the police, and he, you know, often has different viewpoints with Keyan, but he still really values his input and has learned a lot from him and likes working with him. And what I found really just icky is that tons of pearls were thrown at the council that night. We had the ACLU there, we had attorneys and professionals and people with lived experience and people who really knew what they were talking about and really dropped major gems on these folks that night.
Yeah.
And the mayor's comment in wanting to be the champion, his first comment is, I just really found the comments from, the police commissioner from D3 to be the most compelling of the night. So he needed to hear it from an older white man.
Correct.
Right.
And it's like the proximity to whiteness is the only validation of Black pain and of equity issues. It only matters when somebody white says, hey, this is the cool thing to do. Black Lives Matter only becomes a thing that we can say when Netflix decides to put it on the home screen and Amazon decides to put it on the home screen. Like, there's just something really despicable about discounting things that people of color, and in particular Black people, do until somebody white co-opts it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I saw that night, and that was what was most disgusting to me. I think it was then reinforced by, no surprise, Jeff Harris, who then went on to tokenize individual members of color who he felt were articulate and were able to convey their message in a way that was palatable to him, right? And therefore he was able to respect them. And I think Councilmember Valenzuela made a really good point of, what is the point of us having this discourse if we can't bring people to the table who have different views, who are able to inform us and are able to engage with us on these policy issues? Because if the people who were already assembled could get it all right, they would have. So this system is exactly designed to get the outcomes it's getting, and those outcomes are horrifying. So maybe let's try for a moment to listen to some different people and then try to do something different than the way we've always done it.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
For reals. Keyan, you were, at the center of this for a number of weeks, right? Like, because the call for your removal came on the 20th, which and that lasted then a few weeks before there was any sort of I don't know, decision made.
Yeah.
And I guess I just want to take a minute to say, like, how are you after all of this? Because that's a lot. It's a lot to be in the middle of.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the concern and the question on it. It's honestly, I mean, I was coming off into that conversation off of a full work weekend, having worked a conference since Saturday, 9-hour days, and then getting learning that my name was on the agenda, not only on the agenda but also misspelled, even though they've literally had me on the commission for a year, almost 2 years now. But either way, I mean, I'm honestly still just immensely humbled at how many, at the people that showed up, not just in support for me, but also just inspired by the incredibly powerful statements that were given, not just in my support, but just really calling out the white supremacist culture that is rooted within city councils, rules and procedures and decorum. And that's something I think that we really should need to have a hard look at, not shy away from it. One of the hallmarks of white supremacy culture, which, if you want to, if that causes certain folks to shut down, another way you can call it is white middle class dominant culture. But one of the things is one of the key hallmarks of this culture is the fear of open conflict. People in power being scared of having open conflict and then trying their best to either ignore it, deflect it, or just outright run from it. That's what we saw on City Council that night when so many people, not just me, raised an issue that caused them discomfort. What did we do? We prioritized this fictional right to be comfortable, which is another hallmark characteristic of white supremacy culture, where we believe that those with power have a right to emotional and psychological comfort. Even though we pay them, this city council in particular, more than over $1 million to do this job on our behalf. So, that we continue to prioritize that and really just target anybody that disrupts or make discomforts or inconveniences the status quo or within the decorum, even as we have council members literally swearing at constituents, either in person or in text.
Right.
Members were like
Say it.
repeatedly directing their experiences, or like, you know, just talking, like trying to dismiss the direct experience of people of color in the use of their institutions. It really, like, you know, those are the things that we really need to look hard at and continue to call out. And honestly, I'm walking away from this feeling both humbled and also just uplifted and supported and loved, and also inspired to continue pushing the work, because as I can see, like, I'll take people judging me by the enemies that I make. And if a council member is coming after me because I had the gall to call out his racism, I must be doing something right.
Yeah.
Amen.
I think there's, oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that is a really poignant point.
Yeah, I think there's just so much I think that we can say about this, and about the white supremacy culture that exists in our city, you know, especially on the dais. And like, truly, Keyan, to be able to like live through all of that and wrap it up in that way is incredible. And I think one of the things that I often think, and it's coming to mind now, is that I wish that you didn't have to be as resilient as you are.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that you didn't have to take all of the shit that you take in order to bring the incredibly valuable critiques and insight that you do to our community. And I also just want to recognize, as we're wrapping up, that I'm sitting here in a Zoom room with two Black folks who are in positions of I don't know that they're powerful, because the city won't give it to you, but positions of influence on the Measure U committee and on the Sac Police Review Commission. And that all of this bullshit with Councilmember Harris certainly impacts you, Keyan, but also you, Flo, you work so closely with the city to call out all of their lack of cultural understanding, to call out their racism, as you say, in culture, policy, and practice. And so I'm grateful for both of you and for the incredible work that you do. I'm so grateful for your voice. And I think, you know, our show, we really try to bring, like, you know, a call to action to everything, so that we're not just like super angry without some actual, you know, practice to sort of like move the conversation forward. And in addition to doing things like, you know, making sure that you're voting and really paying attention to the Sacramento Sister Circle, because that work is like rooted in racial equity. I think the other call to action, and the thing that I personally am dedicated to doing, is amplifying, Keyan, your voice, and amplifying, Flo, your voice, because your lived experience is incredibly important, and it is so valuable for this community. And it cannot be understated that, like, fuck the assholes who don't think that, because we are so incredibly lucky to have you both. And shit, like, I'm super lucky to be able to sit in this Zoom room, flow with you week in and week out. But yeah, I'm very grateful for this conversation, as sort of like, as it ended up being like sort of like all over the place. But I'm super grateful for it. Grateful for you both. Yeah, that's that, I guess.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Keyan. Your work on the police commission is incredibly important, and it's really an honor to be able to do this work with you. To consider you a friend and a co-conspirator. And I, you know, I think that the reason why I think it's so, like, it's kind of like poignant that you said I'll be known by the enemies I make is because on one hand it's very true and that can be really inspiring, like you're making enemies of the right people. But on the other hand, it's kind of sad that, you know, that so many people can co-opt talking points and just completely miss
Yeah.
Yep.
the humanity of it, right? Like there's a deep sadness in the fact that people are fighting against some basic things that just, I hate to say they shouldn't be controversial, but some of this stuff really shouldn't be that controversial. And the idea that it is, and the idea that we actually have to make enemies in order to be able to stand up for things that, you know, at at a core we should be able to agree on. Just there's a deep sadness and a deep like sorrow and mourning that I constantly go through when I see that. And so I just want to honor that as well of like this has taken time out of everyone's day and life. It has taken emotional labor from you, Keyan, from Councilmember Valenzuela, from Councilmember Mai Vang, um, and from the community to have to show up. And there's a way that it almost felt, very much like a funeral, right? I said to someone, the same thing I say often at funerals, which is, it's great to see you, just not under these circumstances, right? And that's like a common funeral line. There's something really, really sad about that part of it. And also something really hopeful that we are all we have and that we're fighting together. So just really an honor to do this work with you. And thank you for being on the show tonight.
The feeling is 100% mutual flow, and honestly, I take a lot of inspiration, both like how I present myself on the commission, from what I've seen from you over the years, from Measure U, and just like carrying that. And honestly, I stay in this work because of the people that both show up for me and that just show up hard for their community. And like I'm, as sad as it is that we have to look at certain people as, or that people look at us as enemies, we have this sort of mentality. Like I'm not looking at them as enemies. I'm looking at them as deeply ignorant and just fucked up. But because trauma, like we're all traumatized living within a white supremacist culture, white people especially. And it's like hurt people hurt people. So like it's what keeps me going in this movement is just like knowing that I have people to my left and to my right who have my back and are in this with me, that I'm not alone within this. And we're not. That's the thing. Like, so I'm going to keep pushing as long as I have, and with the understanding, I may not get to see the ideal world that that we deserve, but my children may have the opportunity to do that, and all of our children's children do have that. So I'm here to fuck this up. Nothing is permanent. Nothing nothing lasts forever. And shit's gonna change one way or another. So let's make it happen.
Let's do it.
Well, what a show. Adrienne Marie Brown says that nature teaches us that our work has to be nuanced and steadfast, and that more than anything, we need each other at our highest natural glory in order to get free. And I think that that's a really cool way to end a really intense conversation. And needing each other includes you, our listeners. It includes us, co-hosts and guests. So stay angry, folks. And let's keep fighting. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.